Ah, the 2000s. Remember when we had to grow up in a post 9/11 world while witnessing the birth of YouTube and smartphones? Thank goodness the world today is much better. Ha. Being a grade A Zoomer born in 1998, I spent the entirety of my childhood during this decade. I remember all the movies, the video games, and the rock music of this decade. You see, the 2000s came off the heel of the 90s, which was a tough decade to follow, with the birth of the grunge and alternative scene. Bands in the 2000s usually fell into one of three categories: extreme hot topic millennials, combining rap with rock or metal, with mixed results, and bands who were so uninspired that they named their genre the one that came after grunge. This led to a steady decline of rock across the decade that was full of a lot of crap. And today we're looking at the absolute worst of these bands. Now, there are a lot of bands that I could choose for this list, like a lot of bands, so I'm placing a rule for this list. Only bands who have at least one platinum selling album in their discography, meaning that at least 1 million copies of the album have been sold. These are well-known bands. Otherwise, I would have to include Little Timmy's band from down the street. And remember that this is just my opinion. If you like these bands, that's fine. Whether it be nostalgia or your own personal taste, you can like what you like. But in my opinion, these are the top 10 worst bands of the 2000s.
I hate everything about you. Why do I love you?
The Billboard mainstream rock charts often act as a time capsule for the state of rock music in any given time period, and looking back at the 2000s, it's interesting to see where it was at the time. For example, one of the biggest bands of this decade was 3 Days Grace, who also happened to be one of my personal favorite bands of this decade. To this day, they hold the most cumulative weeks at number one at a staggering 82 weeks. I bring them up because coincidentally there was another band with three in their name who also charted very well during the 2000s. If only they were as good. Three Doors Down, most successful album, The Better Life, over 5 million copies sold. What am I even supposed to say about this band? They're boring. There. That's all I need to say about them. I don't get why this band got so much attention back in the day. Most of you probably know them from Kryptonite because it was played everywhere, but they had other hits that did surprisingly well. Loser still holds the record for the most weeks at number one at 21 goddamn weeks. I can't listen to Loser once, let alone for 5 months. I really can't say much else about this band. I'm already bored out of my mind and I just started this list. I mean, at least they haven't done anything despicable, right?
You hate everything about me.
The 2000s were the birth of downloading music digitally, which had a drastic change on the music industry at the time. Gone were the days of trying to sell albums, and in were the days of trying to push as many song sales as possible. Back in the early 2000s, my family cashed in on this new technology through what we all know as iTunes. And back when I first started listening to music on iTunes, there was one band who I really liked at the time. Note that I said at the time. Good Charlotte. Most successful album? The Young and the Hopeless. Over 3 million copies sold. Out of all the bands on this list, Good Charlotte is the only one who I used to genuinely like, but that was only because I was in elementary school and frankly didn't know any better. Looking back, Good Charlotte just couldn't write a song to save their lives. Girls and Boys, the anthem, The Day That I Die, it's honestly some of the cringiest shit I've ever heard coming out of a grown man's mouth. The only reason these guys were so popular is because they marketed their music to a specific demographic, but they did so in such a manipulative way. But hey, it worked, even for me. Though I am glad I grew out of it, and honestly, it's pretty funny to look back on.
I hate everything about you.
Anyone here remember Prince of Persia? Specifically Warrior Within, or as I like to call it, Edgy Prince of Persia. This game was like if you took Sands of Time and doused it with all the awful trends of the 2000s. Angry Prince, more violence than the first game, and of course, an edgier soundtrack. One track that I do like from this game is a song that plays every time you encounter the Dahaka. I should check out what this song is and see if the artist has made anything else of note. Those first few bands weren't so bad. This might be easier than I thought. What's next? Hello? Oh, God, no. Nickelback. Most successful album? All the Right Reasons. Over 10 million copies sold. Okay, I bet a lot of you are confused. Isn't Nickelback like the worst band ever? Shouldn't they easily be number one on a list like this? And while I certainly agree that they were one of the worst bands of this decade, they weren't as bad as most people say that they were. For one, their albums The State and Feed the Machine are genuinely good, and even in their lesser albums, there were songs here and there that were decent. Far Away, Savin' Me, If Today Was Your Last Day, they're not bad, honestly. But the problem with Nickelback comes when they don't try. Notice how Savin' Me sounds a lot like another Nickelback song, Someday, and how Someday sounds a lot like How You Remind Me, and the fact that all three of these songs were on separate albums. Yeah, Nickelback has a problem with having very, very similar sounding songs, which has garnered them some well deserved backlash. Chad's voice is also really rough in a lot of their music, and don't get me started on how uncomfortable a lot of their music gets. Not to mention the fact that Photograph is so bad it was almost written to become a meme. So yeah, Nickelback sucks. But they're not the worst band of this era. Not even close.
I hate everything about you.
You know what's worse than Nickelback? A ripoff of Nickelback. Theory of a Dead Man. Most successful album? Scarves and Souvenirs. Over 1 million copies sold. Theory of a Dead Man, or Toad for short. Ah, screw it, I can't resist.
I am so freaking bored. Nothing to do today. I've had it read it day.
Theory of a Dead Man were a band that resulted from one of the worst ideas ever. Take a band that was already awful and somehow make it worse. Their music is some of the most generic butt rock ever recorded, and I almost instantly forget it as soon as I've heard it. Tyler Connolly, the lead singer, tends to be pretty damn demeaning towards women in his lyrics, especially in songs like Bad Girlfriend and Bitch Came Back. This band is just awful, and unfortunately, they're still charting to this day. I really wish we supported better bands than this watered down garbage.
I hate everything about you.
Everybody has what I like to call a regret band. That one band that you really liked back in the day, but looking back, you wished you didn't spend so much time killing off your brain cells. I've already talked about Good Charlotte and how much I used to like them back in the day, but my dad also has a regret band from the 2000s. Although I'm kind of having trouble remembering them because it's been a while. Stained. Most successful album? Break the Cycle. Over 5 million copies sold. Talk about sad and boring rock music from the 2000s. I hate how dull and lifeless Stain's music sounds. I hate how overplayed It's Been a While was and still is to this day. I hate how much of an arrogant asshole Aaron Lewis is. There's only room for one sad Aaron in this world, Mr. Lewis, and you ain't it. I can't believe how successful this band was and continues to be to this day. I just hope they eventually die off so Aaron Lewis can finally get the help he needs. I don't speak Spanish, I'm American. Deberías aprender español para que no suenes tan estúpido, Señor Lewis.
I hate everything about you.
Puddle of Mud. Most successful album? Come Clean. Over 3 million copies sold. Puddle of Mud is one of the worst goddamn things to happen to rock music. They are so unbelievably untalented with such generic riffs, generic lyrics, and West fucking Scantlin. Fuck this guy. Fuck his nasal singing. Fuck his fake angry lyrics. And fuck his drunk, narcissistic bastard self. Why? Why? Why did this album sell 3 million copies? Why did they play She Hates Me like it was some type of masterpiece? Why does this band still exist? Grrr. Sweet Jesus, what could be worse? Curd. Mercy for Abram, human clear. Over 11 million copies sold. Creed was one of the biggest bands of the early 2000s. Coincidentally, they were also one of the worst. Most of that is because the lead singer, Scott Stapp, is a complete fucking doofus. His overly preachy lyrics, arrogant attitude, and of course, his verse. Can you take me with arms wide open when you are with me? And so thankfully this band had the decency to call it crazy sound as possible. And these days we have Ultra Bridge who almost make up for how terrible Creed was. But hey, at least we can make fun of them now. What if, what if, what if sex? New metal. Said to be one of the worst genres of all time, new metal was a very controversial experiment to say the least. Combining the genres of rap and rock wasn't a new idea, seeing how bands like Faith No More and Rage Against the Machine had already tried and proved that this fusion could work. Unfortunately, as the 2000s approached, many other bands tried to cash in on the new metal trend of the time. Some succeeded, but many others failed. This genre brought us some truly awful bands like Drowning Pool, Il Nino, and Trapped. But not all new metal bands were bad. Korn, Disturbed, and Deftones all have a fairly solid discography, so it is unfortunate that this genre has such a bad reputation, but that is mostly due to the fact that one of the pioneers of this genre also happens to be one of the worst bands of all time. Limp Bizkit. Most successful album? Significant Other. Over 7 million copies sold. Do I really need to say anything here? Limp Bizkit is a textbook example of how not to blend rap and rock, which is unfortunate because some of the musicians in Limp Bizkit are very talented. Wes Borland is an incredible guitar player, and DJ Lethal, most known for his work with House of Pain, does a good job of creating decent beats. The biggest problem of Limp Bizkit is Fred fucking Durst. His voice, his lyrics, his attitude all ruin this band's music. Just listen to Nookie and Rollin' and Eat You Alive, and you will immediately understand that this man has no talent. And yet, this band sold millions of albums and started a whole wave of shit bands in the 2000s. You were too nice, Deadpool. God, I can't handle all this shitty music. There's only one band left. What could possibly be worse than any of the bands listed so far? The answer? It's simple. Simple Plan. Most successful album? No pads, no helmets, just balls. Over 2 million copies sold. Simple Plan is everything wrong with 2000s rock in one whiny, cringy, overplayed package. They couldn't write, they could barely play, Pierre couldn't sing to save his life, and yet they still were played everywhere. It's no wonder this band basically became a meme in recent years, with songs like I'm Just a Kid, Shut Up, and Untitled. Simple Plan were a band that people grew out of immediately and serve as a horrific reminder of where rock music was during the 2000s. Lazy, whiny, overplayed, and just downright unbearable. And I, for one, am glad that it's over. Hey, Aaron, Aren't there any good bands from the 2000s? Well, yeah, certainly. In fact, there's so many good ones, I could probably make a whole list on them.